Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. All right, go on. Get started. Think you made it. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining on Zoom. This is honestly the first time we had some Zoom attendees. So I'm very glad that actually worked. We have with us today, Dane Grace, from Brinca. I'm sure he will do a much better job of introducing himself and his background than I would, but we're very graciously here, sponsored by Brinca today. We will have a talk about how we're going to help prioritize vulnerabilities and make sure that like the noisy environment that we all live in, having to think about all the different criticals and packages and servers to patch. Security would have you believe that that's always an emergency, all of them, but I think we can do better. So let's talk about how we can prioritize what really matters, and maybe deprioritize those things that don't. Thank you, Dane.
Appreciate you. Hey, everybody. Yeah, so I'm Dane. I am a senior product manager at Brinca. At Brinca, I swear this isn't a pitch. We're a risk aggregation vendor, and we say risk and not vulnerability because vulnerability is somewhat saddled with being tied to CVE, but we absolutely work on the application security side, software package side, think more CWE, and I'll get somewhat into that in the presentation. So we basically take all of the risk data we can get from any number of tools, your scanners, your DAST, RAST, SaaS product, SCA, all of that stuff. We aggregate it under a platform. And that's kind of sort of the topic of this is, I joined Brinca last September, not because I was necessarily looking for a job, but because I've worked at another scanning vendor. And this was the exact problem I couldn't solve, especially in the modern infrastructure space. Think AWS, Azure, GCP. And again, I have Log4Shell as an example, but Log4Shell was my kind of watershed moment for that because I basically got the crap beaten out of me for 2 quarters because I couldn't solve organizations' problems that they're facing. And that's kind of why I wanted to focus about that. So for me, I've been in the security industry for a while. I started at Cylance, now BlackBerry Security. We used to be arch rivals with CrowdStrike, so I'm kind of chuckling inside. We worked through I was with them through the exit to BlackBerry Security. I then moved on to Rapid7, where I was a senior PM on the Insight VM product. So that was my foray into VM. After that, I did a short stint doing some consulting work with an anti-ransomware vendor. And then I moved over to Swimlane, which is in the security operation, orchestration and remediation space. So that was one of my first forays into more of what Brinca does, which is as opposed to being an originator of signal and detections, it kind of opened my eyes that I think as an industry, and especially on the defensive side, we need a hub in the middle that's pulling all of that stuff in. And on the source side, it's well known, right? You have SIM, which is sucking in all sorts of alerts from Sysmon and all sorts of other alerting tools. You have your EDR, your firewall tool, your network gateway, which may be producing alerts, right, based on rules and things like that. And then your email security tool. Really in the VM space or the risk space, before Brinca and other companies like us, I really don't think that VM was keeping pace with the sheer amount of signal that these tools were creating. And if I have a graph here about CVE, but if you look at the lines of the number of published CVEs over the past 10 years, it's literally kind of like a hockey stick, right? And not my complaints, but one of my concerns with a lot of the base CVSS risk scoring is that increasingly it seems like everything is higher critical, right? If you're someone the size of Assurant or some of our other customers, if everything's high and critical, nothing is high and critical, right? So these one size fit all scoring mechanisms, which we can get into, I really don't think work. And I think there's been some acknowledgement with that with CSACEP, right? Where the government was like, you know what, stop the presses. Let's just look at the stuff that we know that threat actors are attacking, okay? So I'll start going through my presentation. As I'm going through, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, throw something at me. I would love for this to be a little bit more interactive as opposed to me talking at you. What's that?
So we can throw stuff?
Yes, I'm very fast, I'm very agile. But yeah. So every risk. What I really mean here is that it used to be, and especially in the risk space, it used to be scan devices, find software vulnerabilities, throw it on a CSV, yeet that over to your IT team and be like, get at it, guys, right? And occasionally it was, hey, this one's real bad. Do this one first, then the rest of the list. So you would like highlight, Control X, Control V, that one to the top and be like, work from here down, right? But as we've seen, especially with remote work and COVID, that attack surface has morphed and changed and it's super heterogeneous, right? It's no longer just laptops or servers, which are essentially big versions of laptops, right? There's a lot of different stuff and the adoption rate. I mean, if you look at the adoption rate of AWS, GCP, Azure, if you look at the adoption rate over the past intervening 5 years, like 2020 on, it's increased pretty tremendously. And I even saw it anecdotally where I was in meetings with customers on, fun fact, I started Rapid7 March 9th, 2020. By March 11th, I was sent home for 2 weeks. Everybody remembers that? And then I didn't actually go back into the office till, I think it was like April of 2022. It's so bad I actually left my new hire package on there. And they're like, you know, it's in your new hire packet. I'm like, about that. But my point being is I started pretty early on in the into the pandemic, before the pandemic. And I remember talking to a customer who is a major hotel group. And I said, well, we have these container and cloud assessment features in the product. Are you interested in those? And they said, yeah, we do a lot of acquisitions. We eventually want to get there, but right now we are not interested at all moving to the cloud because it'd be a whole architecture effort. We can't just lift and shift, blah, 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 blah. Q to the third quarter of that year. And they specifically asked me for a roadmap on cloud infrastructure because they're like, by the way, it turns out we don't have a network perimeter anymore. And if that's the case, we can't, it's really hard to secure these data centers. So up it goes, right? So my whole point of this is with the every risk, I don't mean every risk is in every single individual risk, be it CVE or CWE or misconfiguration. I mean it in all of the risks across the landscape of your infrastructure, which is, I think, a lot broader than it used to be 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. Okay. Obvious statement here, but this is kind of the why this is important. Businesses run applications, applications run businesses, meaning these tools that we're using, there's no real way to circumvent them. And as much as you want to say mitigating control, I dare you to try to air gap Salesforce, right? Good luck with that. It's cloud native. That's not going to happen. So with all of these things that you're either out of direct control in terms of a development or, you know, pushing patches to it, what do these things run on? And software, right? And these things run on software. And the reality of the matter is that software has become more complicated as years have gone by. And with that, we've introduced new opportunities for risk. And so this is what I was talking about with CVEs, right? And we'll get into CWE, which is more this crowd. But I want this to illustrate sort of what we're talking about. Over the intervening 10 years, these are the number of CVEs published per year, right? And so 8,000 in 2014, 28,000, 29,000 in 2023. Yes?
What's the CVE?
Yes, great question. I was gonna get that. So CVE stands for critical vulnerability and exploit. So this is actually a formalized by NIST definition of a vulnerability. So there's all sorts of metrics in order to define these things. And those are reported by what are known as CNAs. So these are essentially registering bodies that are allowed to submit CVEs to NIST. And NIST will do a lot of the legwork to define these and publish them. Has anyone ever heard of MITRE? Right, MITRE attack matrix. They do a lot of work in security. If you're super fun, go check out MITRE attack. It has a strange spelling, but they have this whole cool, like navigable table of all the attack techniques you could use. But they're also one of the major CNAs for the CVE list. I have mentioned that because between these two, the numbers don't seem much higher. But NVD has been struggling with a massive backlog of CVEs to the point that they announced, a government agency announced that they are going to hire outside, basically contractors to help them chew through that backlog. In 2024, I think there's something like they had 8,000 or 9,000 when I last checked for RSA, which may seem it's kind of on track to beat that a little bit. You need to remember there's a massive backlog of unpublished CVEs that are going to come out, right? Especially as these contractors get spun up and they start defining these things. Now, part of CVS is the critical vulnerability severity score. And I remember when version 3 came out and there was this, what was it, like 2021? Everyone was scrambling to catch up with that. There's now a V4. Some cool stuff in there. I don't know if it's as much of the quantum leap that V3 was from V2, but those are basically take a bunch of different attributes and weightings and let you produce a value score out of that, right? So they have severity categories, which is critical, high, moderate, low, and informational. And informational, I've only seen a handful actually land on systems, but I think it's one of those things where theoretically, if the wind was blowing from the south-southwest at 3 miles an hour, and someone had their finger on the V key, they could possibly maybe exploit this machine if it's on Windows 10.49321, right? And like I said previously, old school vulnerability management or even risk management was like, just start from CVSS 10 and work your way to the bottom, right? Obviously didn't work, CSCKEV, et cetera. But my point being is that, again, not only has the source of risk changed drastically, but even our definition of risk is we're starting to realize it's more individual than these one-size-fits-all scorings will have you believe, right? A manufacturer of factory where they could possibly air gap stuff is an entirely different boat than Asurion or even Salesforce, where everything happens. Asurion, I don't know Assurion's posture, but like Salesforce absolutely has to have things connected, right? Tell AWS to air gap itself, right? Not going to happen. Same old. So this is the OWASP top 10. On one hand, we saw a few new categories added, which is great. But the real matter is that these classifications here, most of them are old, right? So we're still dealing with a lot of the same problems we've dealt with, but in new ways, right? And I'll get to that with sort of how infrastructure's changed. But these things with new categories, right? A lot of these are coming from different architectures. I'm looking at you, microservices, but we've known where these things, these lists have existed for a while. Sorry about that. And the real matter is because this is so sturdy, because I mean, OWASP is more relevant than ever, right? So obviously old ways or maybe risk management has needed to evolve. And then if you look at, they've added CWEs to the CSCKEV, again, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, known exploited vulnerability catalog. They've added CWEs. And again, OWASP top 10 and the numbers that have been added to CSCKEV. You have to realize this is the government body saying, hey, this is stuff you should pay attention to the point that there are operational directives. If you're doing business with the Fed or sometimes even doing business with someone that does business with the Fed, if you don't meet the operational directives surrounding this stuff, there are federal fines and possibly sanctions surrounding this stuff. This is how seriously the Fed is taking this, right? And I mean, 70 specific instances of CWE on the CSCKEV, right? So it's showing you across 10 things, right? So it's showing you how the risk posture has changed. And then the CSCKEV for vulnerabilities, that's actual CVEs, is what? Hundreds long now? It's something massive. So the point there is that between CWEs, which are generally associated with applications, and CVEs, which are generally associated with actual software instances, if you're going to tackle this stuff in a meaningful fashion, just onesie-twosie from tools isn't going to work, right? And just some examples of what happens when you kind of ignore these things. Facebook Marketplace, they had I think it was a remote code execution of one of the CWEs. They compromised 25,000 accounts. So this is real world stuff. Because of a combination of SQL injection, cross-site scripting attacks, a gang stole a whole bunch of not only accounts and money, but personal data as well. And apparently NVIDIA's ChatGPT box or AI companion that they had was, again, vulnerable to cross-site scripting attacks as well as improper privilege management attacks. And really could have led to denial of service or even exploiting it to get sensitive data out of their AI engine. They were apparently storing a whole bunch of data in there semi-permanently, and between those two CWEs, attackers could have ostensibly gotten access to that.
You're telling me I should give all my secrets to ChatGPT?
You haven't already?
Probably you.
My concern is like I saw an AI engine pop up in Jira, right? And I was like, from a metadata perspective, the queries that I write in Jira are pretty sensitive because I know I put tickets in there. Between ticket numbers, you could get a rough idea of how many issues we had as an organization. I was like, no, thanks. So my concern isn't necessarily ChatGPT in general, sort of the data privacy vulnerability there. It's more so that it's just appearing behind the scenes in products. And I was like, no, I don't want that.
Like the real thing I worry about is Siri.
Yeah.
No, Apple told us it's safe. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Just go back on that other one with the chat. So that's an XSS vulnerability? Or was it more in the, like, was it really cross-site scripting or was it more exploitation? Like
So from what I read in the
prompt
story, and the story was pretty short, is cross-site scripting in the actual prompt engine.
Yeah, so how does that work? Are people like getting the chat box and send back?
That's what I'm thinking, is that they're starting to get it to dump.
Like send stuff back?
Yeah. And it may not even be through the prompt, they may be looking at the API calls back.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like being able to extract the references from the actual object that they're sending back. This, go ahead.
Imagine like let me Google that for you kind of website, but I link you to the conversation that I had with the bot.
Right.
And stored in there is the cross-site script.
Yeah, like I'll send the script back from.
Yeah.
So you're talking about, I heard somebody doing this on comments, like some comments on social media, like there's all these bots that are commenting just to get attention and, to rile you up or agree with your opinion. Is that what you're talking about? Like you're basically like in saying something as a prompt to get a prompt back. Is that what I'm hearing?
Sort of. With a cross-site scripting attack, you're basically trying to get the input to execute code,
Yeah, okay.
right? So the prompt itself is whatever, you're trying to get it to send back data or execute that code that does
Okay.
some things. Yeah.
That's what I'm.
Yeah, what you described sounded like prompt injection, and that's a
whole thing.
That's a buzzword for common attacks on chatbots.
Okay, yeah.
And this one was a pretty simple exposure of sensitive data. Someone left a database endpoint completely exposed to the internet. And some researchers probably were showdanning around and found the endpoint and then realized, not only did they realize it was available on the internet, but, and I'll send this out as a PDF there, so you can get the links. Apparently the organization was storing data they weren't supposed to have in the first place. Like they had a bunch of like federal registry data on an exposed database endpoint. So good job, guys.
Who does that?
Yeah, that's never happened. So again, as applications and software get more complex, we introduce a lot more risks. And again, not necessarily number of risks, though for sure that's increasing, but where those are kind of shotgunned around increase. Like so attack surface as well is actually increasing. So we'll get into the where, but I think this also touches on a bit on the why why this is happening and how sort of the attack surface and the threat model has expanded pretty drastically. So in the beginning of days, software generally were monoliths, especially on the web, right? So just a single software stack, database, some sort of server with business logic as well as a web server, and then a front end, right? And so your attack surface was essentially around that box, around the map monolith, right? And this isn't to say it was easy to secure those things, but it was much easier to quantify your attack surface, and get sort of the pace of risk being introduced, right? And it's also easier to remediate these things because it was in that monolith, right? But in a microservice world, you're essentially feeding, right? You're feeding a front end or some other endpoint for multiple different services, right? So the challenge there is one, you increase your attack surface because you have more things serving other things. In addition, you have a disparate sort of technology stack, right? You have a Python stack in there for your data science, your data service, data sciencey things. You could have Java for just business logic, right? You have Rust in there or whatever. And also more endpoints mean more attackable surface area if you're not careful about making sure those things are, you know, segregated away behind certain auth walls and defensive walls and that sort of thing. In addition, remediating those things, and this is where it gets back to risk-based management, remediating these things gets painful, right? You run a scan, you have this giant table of risks that you need to address. Now you got to figure out who owns what and where to be able to send that over to get them to remediate it, right? So not only is there a pure technological challenge that we're facing in terms of the expanding attack surface, but you actually have a security operations and honestly business operations challenge of making sure you understand who owns these things, how you route those remediation, who actually has responsibility. More importantly, and this is some of the struggle we've run into when trying to solve this at Brinka, who's the one with the authority to really say this needs to be prioritized, right? Hey, you have this thing, the CWA and the CSIC have on this microservice over here. Who's the one that's going to hit the big red button? Because you could tie owners to maybe the code repository in GitHub or the container registry, right? But that might be a DevOps person, and they may not have the authority to disrupt their entire workflow or the dev to go do this thing. So who is it that you go to in the leadership position that can help you make this thing happen now?
I say do
Linda said so. Yeah. I'll fix the vulnerability.
Can you give me your email address? I'll just start sending that out to my customers. Just stick Linda on them, it's fine. And again, not only with the microservices do you have the actual applications, but now you are storing or hosting these things everywhere, right? And I've actually talked to customers. I'm like, so where do you do? What's your code repository? GitHub, BitLab, and then I literally had the dev lead go, yeah. I was like, wait, what? And he said, both. Because we have an acquisition and they were on BitLab or GitLab, but our team started out in GitHub and we haven't wanted to go through the whole effort of merging them. And I was like, so have you integrated, GitLab and everything? They're like, yeah, we're working on that too. I was like, okay, this is gonna be uphill climb, especially for us where we need to ingest data from other sources to prove our value, right? But again, then you have the hosting of Kubernetes, right? Serverless functions. I'm looking at AWS Lambda, stuff like that, where you're starting to go out of the pure kind of software application world and you're getting into CSPM, Cloud Security Posture Management, where you're now relying on Wiz to send you back. You have a misconfigured Kubernetes node, or you have a misconfigured Lambda, or you have a misconfigured Azure function. And you start seeing the problem where you have your static code vulnerabilities, then you have your CSPM risks over here. And then, by the way, your DAST found something over here. And then I'll get into software supply chain, but then you have Sneak send you stuff over for SCA and software supply chain alerts. And you have all of these signals coming in and they aren't necessarily parallel at first glance. So how do you look at those things? For example, when I was working on sort of some cloud products, one of my big scary stories that I would tell customers, of why our CSPM module was important was because at the time, the primary attack, and this could still be the case against especially cloud hosted Kubernetes instances was cryptojacking. So threat actors would scan the internet, show down whatever, find misconfigured Kubernetes nodes or Kubernetes clusters, fire up an RCE or remote code execution vuln, take over the Kubernetes node and start cluster, and start injecting crypto miners in there. And so for them too, it's a red hot, butt on fire race to the finish to get as much money out of that thing before they're discovered. So they would spin up as many pods as they could and just redline it, get the Monero out as it's generated, and then move on. Which sounds kind of sleazy and gross on the face, but if you have a large organization with a pretty big AWS bucket or AWS budget or Azure budget, you can imagine the monetary damage they could do with that amount of compute time. And I saw a couple of reports of like something in the mid millions of damages because they got a hold of multiple clusters in an organization, got everything online and just fired it off all at once and was just extracting coin as fast as they could get. So again, just to kind of quantify the risk or what the damages actually could be. And again, coming back down to it, the ownership, right, of, you have the people that own the code, but in these outside bubbles here, you have the decision makers who can actually push the big red button and say this needs to happen, which on a single application is great. But let's say you have an architecture of a dozen microservices and you find, just for example, 10 critical CWEs, instances of CWEs on each of those, right? Now you're trying to get 40 instances resolved and you need to go to 2, 4, 6, 8 people to get that done. Not only do you need to track the ticket to make sure it gets resolved, but you need to stay with the decision maker to make sure that you're not holding them accountable, but that proper pressure is being applied to get things done, right? And again, this is just for the code level, but imagine if on top of that, you had a number of other CSPM misconfigurations possibly associated with threat actors. So you have a whole new set of business owners that you have to start, not pressuring again, but collaborating with in order to get these things remediated. And yeah, this is just a quick bit here. This was released in 2020, but again, exposed container orchestration are putting many orgs at risk, right? So I think, what was it? The Shodan search found 22,000 insecure instances out there, right? Just on a quick Shodan search. By the way, anyone can use that. I'm sure everyone in this room knows that, but it's just a pretty public search engine. You look for devices on the internet. So just an example of how infrastructure and code are facing similar challenges. So here we go. Software supply chain. Everybody's favorite word. So I was at VulnCon this year, and I would say half of the vendor booths there did something around software supply chain. And again, for those that may not be aware, I think we have a few developers in the audience. You all know that we use libraries, pip, install, whatever, right? I would like to say that we're all doing code audits. We're all spending our free time going line by line to make sure that all of our libraries that we're using, are secure and safe and have no malicious code in them. Because I'm sure you have all the time in the world to go ahead and just go line by line through open source software. But the SolarWinds and CodeCov have taught us that attackers are realizing if they can poison 2 or 3 links up the chain, they can compromise a lot of apps. And then earlier this year, I heard about some research where some researchers were looking at ChatGPT, the security implications to coding. And so they were firing prompts out to ChatGPT to get it to spit back code, right? Long enough code that there could possibly be some vulnerabilities in there, as well as, more importantly, some imports. And what some researchers found is they started getting ChatGPT to hallucinate and start making up imports, make up library names that didn't actually exist in pip. So if you're an enterprising threat actor, you do the same thing, wait until scrape it, have it do a pip check. As soon as it comes back as, package not available, you go register that package name and put malicious code in that package, knowing that some unwary developer might throw a prompt into ChatGPT, see that import, and import your malicious package. And now you compromise your application, right? So again, not to beat on this drum, but we're also talking about static code analysis, software supply chain, SCA, CSPM, as well as all your stuff in DASPRAS. And as we've discussed, hosted across a whole bunch of places. And I just mentioned pip. I'm sure you could do something similar with NuGet. NuGet recently this year found the first instances of poison packages. Was it Java Maven, right? The list goes on, Rust, Ruby, although I don't know how many people are using Ruby, but well, Metasploit, right?
Yeah.
And again, this has been a very long-winded saying that not only increase attack surface in terms of the breadth of what can get attacked, but increase attack surface in terms of what can get attacked, right? So all at once. And this is basically what I got into. I can kind of breeze through these slides, but this whole diagram is basically meant to show you all of the places that these risks are happening simultaneously, right? So this isn't this, then this, then this. From us on the risk management side, we're seeing, Jeremy goes to work, opens up his favorite risk management tool, goes to all findings, and he sees all of this, right? And now he goes, okay, time to start prioritizing. So he has some good risk scoring methods in place. More important though, when he goes to remediate, now he needs to go talk to someone to go get all of that remediated, right? Let alone, he has an aggregation vendor, I don't know who. But can you imagine what it'd be like if you're trying to go single tool, if you're going to Sneak, then checkmarks, this would be Wiz, then Tenable, then I think checkmarks again, like what that would be like for you to try to hop between those tools to get everything.
Yeah, we had so much luck with that before, that we had to go buy this aggregation that you talked about. It doesn't work, having to go to so many different tools, we need developers to lose context, because what one tool may say will conflict with another tool, or there's the false positive conversation that might come up. Being able to aggregate, deduplicate, and bring in that context is really helpful for prioritization.
My favorite is, I can't work on checkmarks vulnerabilities because I'm working on Sneak vulnerabilities this month.
Yeah,
Which are kind of,
yeah, they're definitely related.
and we heard that in the source space, right? A lot of times we would be talking to the lead security analyst and be like, oh, so, you get a case, how are you doing your enrichment, your investigation? He was like, well, and he opened up Word. So they're going to search an IOC on virus total, Control C, Control V. Going to search the other one, Control C, Control V. And then, okay, let me go get the machine details, going to Active Directory, pulling all that, and then basically just building out this report on Word, right? For us, it's more spreadsheet, we're a little more advanced, but that, I mean, again, our Brinka space is blowing up, and I'm not a pitch for Brinka, because I'm here because I believe in the mission, right? I lived it at that other VM vendor I mentioned. And one of it, to go to the Log4Shell example, and I think that's in here, and I'll just circumvent that, right? What happened was, I was talking to a customer, and they were like, it was in the height of Log4Shell, right? So we're feeling it. And the way that our cloud and application security module, they were essentially in silos. They were all under the same brand, but they were essentially 3 or 4 different tools. And so I was on a very frustrated customer call They were a heavy Java and Apache shop, so you can imagine how great that all felt, as well as VMware. Not throwing shade at them, but they were some of the most affected software sources, right? And they're like, I need to find all of my Log4Shell instances right now. How do I do that? You are a VM vendor. And I said, well, you could find it over here in the CSPM module, and you could go over to the application security product, and then you can go over here to find it on all of your internal servers, and then you have all of them. He's like, no, I need a list that I can start working on this. And my response was, how do you feel about Excel, right? And so I say that as, you know, I'm not pitching you, I'm talking about our space in general, and that's why I believe it, because I've lived it. And then Spring4Shell came out. And then Print Nightmare came out, right? And Print Nightmare was well after everyone went to remote work. So scans were even picking it up. They're getting some agent details, right? So they're pulling stuff from VPN logs as well as Active Directory and this, that, and the other thing. And I got back to the, how do you feel about Excel all over again? So I've lived it, and that's kind of where all of this came out, as I'm low-key venting my trauma to all of you right now.
I love Excel.
I feel better. I don't know about it. Yeah, and again, this is more just what we're saying of trying to route things to different groups, trying to grab it from different tools, trying to drive the remediation, which is this bit, and then tracking all of that so that when leadership says, hey, where we're at with that thing, or what does our risk program look like? And Excel again, unless you have some sort of other tool in our space to do something like this. Went through the Log4Shell example, right? That pretty much says it. Log4Shell could have existed. Well, so let's run this through. Your heterogeneous environment, Log4Shell could have been in your container registries, right? So you have containers that run some sort of Apache with Log4Shell. It could be on your internal data servers. Let's say you have a dev server in the network perimeter, good for you. But then you also host it in VMs and AWS. Then you have another application that hosts it in Azure Container Service. So there's 4 spots. Oh, by the way, all of the devs have local instances. So you got to find all the laptops because they have internet access, and they get real cranky when you take it away, right? And you have multiple instances of each, and you have to talk to all the developers or go through their manager, DevOps, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see how Log4Shell is this really potent example of how this can just spaghetti everywhere, and that tool hopping just gets really painful really quickly. Jeremy, do you want to talk about your XZ experience? I think you mentioned that.
Yeah, luckily, and I realize I'm probably not all that much on camera, but the XZ backdoor was, I think, found one of our friends from the DPRK.
Okay.
Ended up sponsoring, trying to get a backdoor over SSH to basically every Linux server in the world. And I think we were pretty fortunate here, thanks to our aggregation tool, that we were able to say with really high confidence, we didn't have any real risk. We had a handful of servers that were dev focused that were impacted, but we were able to answer that question because of a tool like our favorite aggregation tool.
Right.
But XZ was a really dangerous one for us because had that not been the case, we would have been running around everywhere because XZ was so critical to, like I said, SSH, and it's on firewalls, it's on your load balancers, it's on all the Linux servers.
It's Heartbleed all over again.
It's everywhere. And it was gonna be a really bad day right before I went on vacation.
Yes.
We didn't have all the bleeding edge Linux in our environment to have to feel that impact.
So, okay, I'm gonna assume not everyone's familiar with what the XZ phone was. So, quick story, because I've told like 40. XZ is a compression algorithm used in a lot of Unix-like systems, Linux, previous, you use that. SunOS, I'm sure it's out there somewhere. And it's used, like Jeremy said, in a lot of different very pivotal projects, SSH, a lot of encryption algorithms for compression. So apparently the main developer of the project of XZ, and it's one dude, was in somewhat failing health, having trouble keeping up with issues. And out of nowhere on GitHub, right?
Yeah.
This knight in shining armor shows up to start helping out. sending pull requests and merge requests with fixes for bugs and things like that, and ran with this for quite a long time.
About 12 months of innocuous, perfectly.
Like
fine.
actually helpful.
Send legitimate pull requests, fix issues, add documentation, and then obscure the build process so much that nobody could see that there was a backdoor embedded in the platform.
They basically started social engineering the main developer to give it, ceding them more control of the project. And yeah, they, at one point, they ended up injecting a backdoor into the XE util, which again, it's kind of the example of how it could have been spread everywhere because it's used in so, it's one of those sort of software supply chainy things where it's used in so many different projects that are kind of fundamental to how we do business that it could have shown up anywhere. So what now? Okay, again, I'm talking about aggregation. I'm not talking about my company. Again, I'm here. I'm here for the culture. I'm not here for the sales. I don't make a commission on anything, despite my best efforts. So with everything that I've said, you're looking at all the different places, ostensibly all the different tooling that you could be pulling signal in. And imagine here if you have each of these pull, and this is a low number, especially for Asurian, 100 different findings per these tools, right? Imagine trying to hop between tools or handle this in spreadsheets, right? Next thing you know, you have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 600-line spreadsheet for Wednesday. Just to remind everyone, tomorrow is Thursday and Friday. So you have another 600 coming, right? So this is my argument for these consolidated sort of aggregation vendors of where someone in this space, similar to SOAR, we can pull signal. I mean, we in the greater space, not just us, can pull signal from all of these different tools, right? Pull those findings and the assets. More importantly, we keep in this space, vendors can integrate with CMDB tools. We can integrate with Active Directory, where we can start building you can start building ownership structures, right? In addition, the risk scoring doesn't, because we're an aggregation vendor, we're essentially a data aggregation vendor. We don't have to rely on CDSS or one-size-fit-all scoring solutions. You can add things to attenuate risk up or down. Something's on the CSICAV list, add a +1 to that score. Something you have a risk factor in where you know if it's in this environment, it's either air gapped or behind VPN. Okay, let's attenuate the risk down by 0.5, right? So you can actually get contextually aware risk scoring. That matters because you can start doing actual prioritization based on the variables of your environment, not just, well, NIST said it's bad. PS, like the number of criticals and highs is pretty much untenable at this point, right? And there's a number of other things you can do once you have all of that data in sort of the aggregation vendors with automations, right? You could say, hey, if this thing is a critical, we're going to set a timer via a configured SLA, and we want to see this done in a week, right? And you can go to your SLA page or whatever it is and start seeing, hey, what are my critical risks that are about to run into the end of their SLA? Meaning some of the most dangerous crap in my environment has been there for what we considered coming on too long, right? And again, with the ownership, you could say, with that ownership structure built in, if you have ownership built in, you can say, hey, Jimmy the dev, you've got a day left to patch this, to change this out, to decode, encode that user input, whatever it is, right? So you can actually start driving remediation in intelligent fashion, as opposed to throwing spreadsheet, lists of risks to a bunch of dev managers and be like, you got it, and just walking away, right? A number of us have integrations to ticketing solutions, so you can push tickets directly into Jira and then track it in Jira, because that's where developers work or DevOps people work. Just about a lot of people work. DevOps engineers as well. So you can see, hey, that Kubernetes node that Kubernetes cluster has an SSH port open, and that's real convenient for you, but it's also real convenient to attackers. Just for your information, so you can track that and that sort of thing. So the aggregation isn't just getting the risks and the assets in a single place, but there's this whole contextual story around security operations. And so in the SOAR world, they had the SOC, right? Security Operations Center. That's That's the dudes with like multiple monitors in a dark room with the big pew map.
We can tour ours if you'd like after the call.
I'd love to see it. Actually love looking at socks. We want to see, and I think the industry needs to see what we call a rock, right? Where similar dark room, similar multi-screen monitors, but instead of like the pew map, you know, people shooting exploits at each other, that's not a real thing, by the way. There's like top 10 criticals that are about to meet their SLA, so that the whole team knows that's got to get done now, right?
So taking a step back, in Brinker, you can use metadata from those signals that you pull in to like prioritize the vulnerabilities in some way.
Yeah, so the vendors will oftentimes provide us either with the CVE ID, the CWE ID, and with the CSPM stuff, they'll provide us with not only their risk scores, but sort of whatever those misconfigurations are based on, you know, SOC 2 benchmarks or whatever it is. What we can do, and I don't think we're unique, is we can apply what we call in the product as risk factors. And so we have out of the box ones, right, where if they're on CSACAV, this is known exposed to the internet, we can get that context either from the CMDB or some other third-party source. So not only can we see this thing's here, but we can pull in that context of the asset. But you could also pull in that risk factor to say, hey, this is on CSACAV, bump it up. But you can also actually create risk factors from scratch too.
So you can say like, if this is a critical mature exploit, I want to add this as a risk factor and give it a higher.
Yeah, you could say, hey, this is our payment server. We know this is our payment server. Bump this risk factor by 1 billion, right?
So say like this thing contains PII, we want to bump.
Yes, we actually have a PII as an out of the box
Yeah.
risk factor.
Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, for those of you that work in the street, I think with Brinka 11, Ian had worked on, I don't know if you did, but had worked on some of that, so we're moving towards that, but we don't have that yet.
Because that's my
I think
question.
that's where you were going.
Yeah, that's one thing that we run into is like, we have all these different, I guess you call them signals, we have all these signals and we need to prioritize. And sometimes like, Linda, that's what you and I have met about, it's like, how do we prioritize this?
Right.
All of it needs to be done, but can we put different scores or different things on?
Yeah, so it's something we want to work towards.
As you were digging into that, I would love to talk to you about that, about what makes sense for you and where we can help. So that I can do an OWASP talk.
Yeah, we have, I think we can probably say we have goals in the future of, you know, considering all things like which client of ours, you know, so take a revenue consideration, like how much financial impact might the company take on?
That'd be awesome.
If this particular system is compromised. Maybe that's more impactful to the business if this resource is exploited versus something else.
Right.
That's probably a risk factor for us.
Right.
Something being end of life and therefore not supported probably sounds like a risk factor. Or I'd even say there could be some cultural ones where certain teams may be slower to address their tech debt than others. That probably sounds like a risk factor in my mind because that team, when they get a critical, we know it's going to languish in the environment for 90 days or longer if we don't want it to. It's just the way that particular group might work, and that's a risk that we could start to take into account internal knowledge about the way our people work and prioritize for us.
Thank you for that comment, because this is the greater point beyond the tooling is the operations around the tooling, right?
Yeah.
Because you have the best tool in the world. If you have no way to weaponize it, done, right? And I think that's at the heart of the spreadsheet or 10,000 CVE long list problem is like, how do you get people to move on that? You don't.
Because if you can't operationalize it, then this tool turns into just next to that spreadsheet, honestly, like if you can't do anything with it, like that same thing.
A really expensive GCP box.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, we're not for us as a company, but like we think philosophically, there should be this concept of the rock, right? Because if you say the SOC, you know what it means, you know what the tooling is, you know the challenge they're facing. You say that to risk management team, and I feel like it's a lot more ephemeral, right? And you could say risk analyst, but that doesn't have the same rigidity of definition that a security analyst would have, right?
Peter came for just a cookie.
The talk is a cookie.
Yeah. Yeah, we got.
Yeah, we kind of got this, but again, this is the operations piece. Yeah, that's pretty much the end of my talk. Does anyone have any further questions? I know we've been fielding them as we go, but would love to.
Okay, so like, going back to the chat GPT and concerns that constantly go through my head, because I'm a full stack developer.
Okay.
When I was in school, I was constantly.
Wait, what technology stack?
Oh, JavaScript.
Nice. So no,
What's that?
no.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Be
Oh,
careful
yeah.
with NPM, man.
What's that? Yeah,
Be careful with NPM.
okay,
The packages, verify your packages.
okay.
Dare I say JavaScript is the vulnerability?
Isn't it?
But ECMAScript is fine. ECMAScript is fine.
Okay, so you're saying verify, how would I do that?
Don't just, you see a Stack Exchange article, be like, oh, I just used NPM install
No,
blurb.
that's horrible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay, that's all I want to get across.
okay. I guess the question
Please
I
don't
have
be
is
a
like,
developer, just import.
I know, yeah,
But it goes on Stack Exchange, it's okay.
yeah. Trust it, no, but I guess the question I have is like, I'd be coding with a few friends, I'd be coding with a few people, and I'd ask them, hey, what do you think of this? I need help with this, I'm getting this. And then they would say, their first reaction, of course, was, hey, just try ChatGPT, throw it in there and see what happens. And we need to breathe, you know what I'm saying? So my
Well, I would be
question
more
is,
comfortable with co-pilots like in Visual Studio Code.
yeah,
And my one concern with that are general hallucinations.
right. So, but I guess the bigger thing is, and I've never heard referred to as hallucinations, which I need to remember, but the biggest thing I have is like, what if ChatGPT, what if OpenAI was like hacked? Is that all there? Like, I don't know how that.
What if, not, no, when it is,
When?
not if.
Yeah, okay.
I like telling you nothing.
Yeah, I guess that's what it is. I guess that's,
No, so,
You all had, you raised a very good question. We finally got to this point where you teach people, don't just go to install a random package, don't go to Stack Overflow or somebody's blog and take their code verbatim and drop it into your project.
technically open source though.
Yeah, it's open source. We finally teach people to actually think about those things before they add them to their internal environment. But now we add in the chatbots and the LLMs that will autocomplete some code. It's based on all that stuff we told them not to go do in the first place. So we're not all that much better. And it's a fair concern if you ask me, what happens when the model is poisoned? Or it hallucinates and tells you something that's totally vulnerable.
Right.
Or is not gonna at all do what you want it to.
right.
How do you look for that? Like, well, we still have to, we're human and we need to have those tools that we've been paying for, do some code scanning for us, and honestly, we need to review our own code as well too.
So I think that's where defense in depth comes into play though.
Absolutely.
Having defense in depth and looking at code review and a pipeline scan and.
And it goes back to, so to your code review, but your manual, dual checks on all your commits and making sure somebody's looking at it, doing that.
But if I'm hearing the spirit of your question, I think you're saying is like, if ChatGPT gets hacked, will my code get extracted?
Oh, I mean, yeah, but I mean, even, I've experimented around with ChatGPT just to see what it comes out, but ultimately, I mean, I've had to go through and look at it and be like, what's going on here, But like, I know there are people out there that have like confidential information in there, just loaded it in there.
Oh, yeah.
It may just be sitting around doing nothing, but if that's hacked, I mean,
Oh, well, you don't even have to hack, I mean, if people are putting confidential information.
right, they just asked the right
in-
question.
Into,
They are
it's just
mining you.
asking,
They are
yeah,
mining
you
you, yeah.
can get
Maybe
it
I'm
out.
just overstating what you're saying, but it's been like a horror film overplaying in my mind to think
So-
about.
Is there any use of DSPM tool that look into the, seeing what the user is putting into the AI bots and trying to restrict it at some point in time before it even gets there?
Yeah,
Oh,
there are some, but
Yeah, there you go.
yeah,
Even then, that sounds like fancy projects.
Well, and that's, I mean, that's what it amounts to, because we've got developers all over the place that are doing scrubs of that data before we put it in. So use it.
Small twist of using AI to scrub the inputs to the AI.
Look,
Like a Russian nesting doll situation.
for, being kind of agreed on this, the way that I see AI is actually at like Reddit, give a certain level of
Yeah.
information.
Yeah.
You know, it's not, like they say, it's not 100% secure.
My question is, and again, that's why I would veer, if you were going to do this, one, obviously get approval, but steer people to more like, so the ChatGPT is pretty generalized. If you're gonna do that kind of thing, try to use one of the co-pilots that are really intended for code. But the couple things that I would say, one, no one will convince me, at least in the near term, that with any generative AI, you have any illusion of privacy at all. And I worked at an ML product at Cylance. I helped build the taxonomy to train the model for malware. We were sucking malware from everywhere. Part of the license agreement with the customer is if we see something that we don't have in our corpus, we fully have the right and capability to upload it so that we can train models on it. So if you don't think ChatGPT is sucking up your code and training models on it, you're a little naive. Two, more importantly, the code that it's spitting out, do you know what it was trained on? Probably a whole bunch of GitHub repositories. For better or for worse.
I think that's why, like, Microsoft's acquisition of Copilot and GitHub was such a strategic move.
Yep.
They saw that coming 10 years ago.
Well, Bing was arguably their first data harvesting platform for their AI and ML work.
And then they moved forward with, Edge, right?
Right.
And that's like end-to-end client
Yep.
integration.
Well, I mean, and there's online code editors, right? So getting all of that. So yeah, I mean, to your point, man, like, yeah, I get it. I would be less, I don't know, I'm concerned that ChatGPT will get compromised. I would be surprised if they have. I would be shocked if they haven't. I'm more so, I think we're all worried about the human behavior element of it. Of people just leaning back and going, because we're just starting, like, with freaking email, we're just starting to get like, maybe you shouldn't click everything. Huh? Maybe? Go ahead, yes.
I remember back in the day, my brother-in-law, his fiance, she was a radiologist.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was in cybersecurity, she said, hey, I've been trained. I'm like, what does that mean? She's like, well, they taught us don't open up attachments if we don't know the people. That was her cybersecurity training for the hospital. So to your point, data doesn't matter. It's what people are doing.
Right.
And the only place data is completely safe is in your head when your mouth and hands don't work.
If a 3-acre breach in the last decade, there was an operation security failure somewhere. Yep. 100%, yes.
It's a meme that I saw, and it's like a truck full of people, and it's like, you got firewall, you got all these other security measures, and then so the end user, and he's holding the latch.
Yeah.
That sums up how end users tend to be.
I laugh if it wasn't so accurate. Yeah, with the operations center, I mean, I've kind of touched on that, of like with the risk stuff. If you can't operationalize around it, you're done. But to your point, like, you're speaking pretty squarely into an operation security concern.
Right.
And that I think will always be our weakest link because, okay, this is gonna sound lame. Everybody take a deep breath in, hold it. Security is a mindset. We are by nature more scrutinous and skeptical people.
Yeah.
And apparently it's rubbed off on my wife because they're like, hey, could you send up a spreadsheet and give me all the passwords to these like marketing websites? And she was like, absolutely not. Where are we gonna put it? On OneDrive? No. And she's like, we're one wrong email away from all of our admin passwords just getting somewhere,
Are
right?
you proud of her?
I tear, single masculine tear.
I just have my passwords on Post-it note, all around my monitor.
Air gapped.
But you just need one password, what are you doing?
I was like, no, because everything, like,
Password one, two.
everything makes you add this or add that. So I have my original passwords from my Yahoo account from the nineties. And now there's letters, there's numbers, there's exclamation points, there's asterisks. There's, hey, you gotta use 2 of these in a row, or you can't do these in a row. So I input like 15 different passwords. It's like, yo, my banking password is probably the easiest one, because I think it's the second oldest.
So
And I
my
don't
joke,
change it.
my joke at silence was,
This is being broadcast.
Well, not just that, but right, people, here's the catch, people aren't getting my passwords from me.
Yeah.
They're getting my passwords from their bridge, right? I'm pretty sure that if you bank with Chase or Simmons or Bank of America or Citibank, North Korea already has your password.
as the proud victim of the
They're
Aetna breach,
disconnected from the internet.
Blue Cross breach, and the UHG breach, my life's an open book involuntarily.
I like the fact that I log in and get a text now. Type this number in. Cool, okay, that's gotta be it, that's gotta be legit, right?
Yeah.
My email, I've had it since 2015, and I've typed in for get pwned, I think it's what it is.
Oh, have I been pwned?
Have I been pwned, and
Yeah.
I've been a part of 8
It's from the
breaches.
SpyCloud guys, and they're great.
It popped up, I think like 8 or 9 breaches.
Yeah.
So that's nice. Use the same password for almost everything, but.
My problem,
So realistically, unique passwords everywhere and MFA everywhere.
YubiKeys. I think hardware, everyone wants to get rid of the password. I think hardware tokens are the answer. Yeah, they're a pain in the butt.
I was really mad about the YubiKey, but I actually really like
Or when they implemented them here.
it. Yeah, I'm really, instead of having to use the phone, like.
I saw them at RC, I'm like, I use your product, I love your product. And I was like, come on, give me one, give me one, give me one. They're like, cool, thanks. I was like, oh.
The cool part about, I mean, I've been a GPT user for 10+ years. And I really like them over something like the push notifications that come from the various vendors that are out there. Because that's a common attack that pen testers will do anymore. Once they breach your password, they'll take advantage of the fact that the alert that will continually pop up when they log into the system that they've compromised over and over again will generate an alert that finally like, well, maybe I did log in here. And you click that
Just stop.
Face ID and then they're in. I've disabled that anytime I have those tools that I don't have a choice to not use. I don't want the push notification ever. I'll type in a 6-digit code
Yep.
or I'll go to the hardware token, but those push notifications are the worst.
I'm just trying to log into WoW, bro. And
Your air gap, don't worry about it.
Huh?
Your air gap, don't worry about it.
I don't know, it just seems like it's not our side that they're getting passwords from and getting hacked on it. I mean, think about this, right? A few years back, one of the largest credit bureaus in the world was hacked. And then you get an email, oh, hey, you might be involved in this, and then you find out that their CIO was fired. That was their response to the rest of the world. We took care of this, we fired the CIO because it was probably his fault. So, I mean,
Probably.
they could come up with 17 different ways to log in, it's just. You gotta, the applications you're using have to be protected, because it's usually not coming from us. Right, I've never handed anybody my Yahoo password.
That you know about.
Well,
I only put it in one place, I never like, if I get an email from something, I always go online,
So
look
that's,
it up, and I call them.
that's the human behavior piece, right?
Yeah.
And that's one thing I tried to get to my wife, is like, you never respond to an email.
I never respond to
If,
emails,
if,
especially from the government.
if.
I know they're trying to draft me.
Yeah.
But you never responded anymore, you said?
So instead of, if, let's say my bank,
Yep.
Bank of Dane says like, hey, you have a new announcent, I'm never clicking on that email link. I go to bankofdane.com or the app and I go there. And so the way I think about it is like anything that you consider sensitive, which is, financial health or love life. It's always pull, it's never push. They never pushed you, you always pull the information from them.
Yeah. It blows my mind how two of my brothers, they became software developers maybe 10 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that. And I kind of thought like, oh, And I mean, I'm in it now, but I kind of thought like, oh, 10 years from now, it'll be like, so oversaturated and, they'll have security down. It'll be like, it'll be good. And I see people every single day just breach opportunities, just all the time. Security, it blows my mind. I mean, we're still not there. I think yeah.
It's,
And real quick, if anybody wants any more food, it looks like they're cleaning it up out there, so
Oh, thank you.
go get it
That feed
now.
was good.
you need to be careful as an industry, and any practitioners, feel free to correct me, trying to apply technical solutions to behavioral problems.
Oh,
Not just that, but I've seen, so the last place I was in, we did microsegmentation. And I was starting to talk to CISOs that were now responsible for the physical security as well.
Yeah,
And I was like, what, how does that, it's like, well, we always gotta respond, cause it's usually a door that's been breached, and that door's all, that door's.
the doors on the network, and the
Yeah.
network is software.
It's all like, gotta be kidding me. Or, one of them it was a power company, but they also had a lot of charging stations.
Which are on our software.
Yeah, and the same thing, it's like they might have physical, like a little security guard, but that rolls up under overall network security now. And I forget what they called it, but I was starting to see that happen.
One of the coolest use cases I saw on the security automation platform that I work for is all of the badges had automations built that when they had to enter an expiration date. And they powered it through the APIs of the badge reader, so that as soon as that badge, if it reached its expiration date, if it wasn't already there, it would kick off an automation and deactivate the badge. If it was considered lost, it would, not deauth the badge, but, it would, basically mark it to be destroyed, basically remove the entire account. There's a really clever piece of that. And then it would send a bunch of Slack alerts that happened to the security team.
But I don't think we'll never, like, security can get it, it's kind of like the Middle Ages, right? Armor, right? They went with chainmail because it would stop a slash, but then the arrows would penetrate it, so they went with plate mail to help stop the slash and then to stop the arrow. And I think that's gonna be the same way with security, because security is always gonna be needed to go deeper. I mean, every time we come up with a security solution, remember, the bad guys just sit there banging on it 24/7. And
right.
it's not just a person anymore, it's like hacker farms, right? There's people in North Korea, there's people in Russia, there's people in China. There's people in Iran that are just sitting there constantly trying to defeat the system 24/7.
And now you have ransomware operators that
Yeah.
have a monetary incentive and these
Yep.
advanced breaching capabilities that are also privateers,
It's
patriots.
some of it's not trying to be malicious, like I downloaded this, I don't know how I got this, but it's a Yahoo search. And I use Google, but it always defaults to Yahoo trying to get me when I do my searches, because they get paid on my clicks. So they're not trying to mess with my system, they're just trying to get paid. So, I've done all this research, I've taken out 15 times, like every Tuesday at 9 AM, it rolls back over, so I always have to go into my search bar, type google.com, actually get to Google and then do my searches that way. It's never going to end. And I'll tell you right now, I've been dealing with the vulnerability stuff for a very long time. And like we said, it started off with some, easily managed, we get a couple. But I work with the largest healthcare provider in the US. And their vulnerabilities are in the tens of millions. And every single, they have a hospital in every state, and in Europe, they have a hospital. And every single hospital uses their own set of tools, because they didn't build these hospitals from the ground up. They bought them, they inherited them, they traded them, and you get what you get. Right? And if you try to bring new tools to these folks, they shut down, screw you around, they won't quit. So now all of a sudden, you go to a security meeting, it used to be quarterly, and it was, usually some VP and talk about the security. Now it's 15 people having to share their laptops, because guess what? Well, we use this tool. No, well, we use this tool. Well, and each one of those tools might be important on the assets and vulnerabilities in different ways. So if all of a sudden I see a vulnerability from this tool and a vulnerability from this tool, and they're not equal, where the hell am I gonna start?
Right.
So I think we don't need to worry about security. It's always gonna be there. It's always gonna conform. But at the end of the day, you need something to help you bring clarity, right?
Yeah.
We had cars before we had traffic lights. If I would go to Nashville right now and just shut off all the traffic lights, Cars aren't gonna stop, we'll just have more accidents. So first we invented, then we gave stop signs, then we did traffic lights, and then we sync those traffic lights. And that's really what these platforms do, is they bring that visibility to the whole city, right? To the whole grid of what's going on. And that's how I found this Brinka is. I dealt with CISOs when they weren't CISOs. Now they're CISOs. Hey, we got all these tools. We are so underwater. Right? Cause that's, everyone's, and when we do figure stuff out, who the hell owns it? That person's moved on. It's like, yeah, it's still, it's still in the system that's owned by Peter.
Well, it's just
Who the hell is Peter?
It's just easier to ignore.
Every time, it's always Peter.
It is Peter. Pumpkin eater. I mean, that's the thing, right? So platforms like this, that's how you revolutionize. You don't have to change how you're doing things. We just need to change how we're seeing it and how we're reporting on it. Because if I bring a new tool in, go, hey, everybody gather on, I'm gonna train you on this tool. There's a 99% chance that that's gonna be shelved for by the time I leave.
So the challenge is, and I'm talking about for us in the space, and I'm friendly with people in the other vendors, right? And again, I'm referring to the space because I believe in the space. It's hard to be sexy when we're not generating alert.
Yeah.
Because we found the thing, right? But the whole thing of like, hey, we ingested all of it and we're giving you sort of an intelligent picture of what your environment looks like. That's a much, it's hard to put a dress on.
We hand out the trophies for the thing that found the thing.
Right.
Because now when you go have a security meeting, right, because now they used to happen yearly, then they were quarterly, now they're monthly, or they like weekly, sometimes daily, depending on what's going on.
At least every week.
I got one place to go to see everything that's happening with all the tools across my infrastructure.
So in a place I worked at before in the past, like I've brought up a vulnerability to the VP. I was like, hey man, we're generating JOTs,
Can I ask what your role is? Can I ask what your role was?
senior solid engineer,
Okay, cool.
full stack.
Good for you, man. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, but I also have background in cybersecurity.
Okay, cool.
And so they were like, I was like, hey man, we're generating JOTs and we're authenticating with JOTs, but we're not even validating them in the backend. They're useless. People could just pass a string and we're in. And
Talk
like,
about JSON web tokens, recent jobs.
Yeah,
JWT.
and the VP, quite frankly, was just a bit clueless. He like, I think, like, he's like, what do you mean by this? I was like, well, you're the VP here. I'm just a full stack guy. Like, don't you think this is a security vulnerability?
I want to believe that culture is changing. Okay. That's got my hopes and dreams
It's
dashed.
slowly changing, but some of the people that are more higher up, especially the technology has changed so much
Yeah.
that they can't keep up with it. And when you're at that higher level, you can't do it. That's why you
We're
hire
just so
the smart
disconnected.
people to do it. You just have to be able
I
to
think a lot of
communicate
it-
that risk.
I think a lot of it is that they can't quantify how much money it.
So I was just, sorry to interrupt you. Ransomware, I hate it. I hate ransomware actors. They've done terrible damage. In a way, oh God, I'm gonna say this on recording. They've been a kind of a blessing to security.
Yeah.
Because it's a very quantifiable and easy to understand consequence of security failures.
Because I think at first glance, it's like optics.
I'm all for making ransomware the boogeyman.
Yeah.
I'm all for security people being like, okay, so we did this because ransomware. And then we resolved this, got it, ransomware, right? Because Lockbit, right? Because Black Hat, right? Like, if that's the silver bullet, let's go, let's go.
That's the thing you usually hear, like, when you're talking about product, it's like, do we build this feature, or what, define it, or do we do this security there? Like, how much, like, money is quantifiable, like, that's the thing that I want to rely.
Right.
Yeah.
I do think that's really important, the cost impacts of having engineers not build features or make the product more stable or help sell to the next client by building something custom, like it could be any of those things. And instead shift to tech debt and fixing a security issue. That has a business impact and security leaders see dollars first. Leaders see dollars first. The best on the security side, I'd say get out of the way and trust their people that they've hired to take advantage of the platform, like the ones we're talking about here. They can
Or
ring player.
I think I'm personally pretty fortunate to work with some really good leaders here that do empower us to make, that we get to push the red button when it's our time. And I hope that that's a continuing trend, that leaders that understand business probably better than I do, because it's not where my heart is. They do their job well, but they trust me to do mine.
Can I ask you a question? And I haven't been a practitioner in a long while. Do you see a bit of the animosity starting to like relax between like, no?
Well, I do, because I used to work for a government contractor that did TSA, Homeland Security, FBI type thing. And that place was us versus them on the infrastructure side against all the developers. Like, all the infrastructure guys would think, we wouldn't have any issues if it weren't for those lazy or bad, stupid developers that must write horrible code. And like, I lived in that culture for a while and even brought that here with me, where it was a hard bone to break. Which is not true at all. Like, it took me a long time to understand that. I do think it's gotten better, but it's maybe more representative of the culture that we work in here. Because I don't know if that's the same place, but that's the same way everywhere. Other teams, other developers might still have that going on, that teams blame them for the vulnerabilities and all the risk that they're exposing. Never mind the fact, that there's probably a server that's been sitting out there with some really bad critical vulnerabilities for years and nobody thought about it. So those infrastructure guys get to point the fingers a lot, and maybe sometimes the app guys, because the infrastructure guys for a long time couldn't code anything. There's a lot of, well, you're the problem, or you're the problem, and the fingerprint, we don't do that here, so maybe I'm lucky.
Yeah, post CrowdStrike, now developers can be like, see, told you.
I think one thing that helps us here, going back to like, you said security is a mindset. We have this program called Security Mavens. And it's sort of like where we're training engineers that are embedded with the teams, like actual software engineers that learn security. I think if those engineers act as a conduit between security and the engineering
That's
teams,
really,
and DevOps teams, and
that's
it's like,
really smart.
it's a little bit easier to quell some of that because we have that program. Like, it's a way for us to communicate with each other and like, because I'm one of them, and as a security maven, I can go back and say, well, this is a security team's point of view. And to do the same, be able to do the same thing with the security team and kind of come to some common ground. I think that helps us a lot. But that goes back to, it's a part of our culture here.
But that's how you build culture, right? It's not this, we do this here at Asurion. It's, you get advocates and people that are passionate to sort of inculcate that.
I do think part of it is like value proposition, especially of like functional and non-functional requirements, with security being almost non-functional, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes the business individuals, the business side of the firm doesn't quite understand that. They're like, dude, I need 50 buttons today. Crank out buttons.
There's
Dude,
that
you-
big
That's-
disconnect between the actual, like, how about you sit here and see what I do
Right,
and see
right.
how long it takes? I remember I worked with this guy that, he's a master, I'd say, at access control, but he's got about 7 to 10 different certifications, stretching from networking all the way to, what was it called, OSHA certifications as well. But
Oh shit, like occupational.
Yep.
Wow.
so
okay.
he's got his OSHA 30 hour.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
but one of the things that he always said was that if I had the option to have like an actual, like the person I'm working for to come sit with me for a day and see what we do, then they actually will have a good representation of how long this will take.
Right.
I remember one of the things that I had to do was set up a security server and set out all the cameras, and they're like, can you get this done in like 2 days? I'm like, no. And
It'll take me 2 days to move the ladder. Right.
and it actually took us about a month because gotta love cameras that don't work.
Yeah.
Well, and you're looking at changing angles all the time and.
Let's see, I think it's Illustria cameras that had been sitting there for a year. Gotta love them.
Wow.
We'll cut that from. Tax service.
Yeah, no, but that's a good point too, and like Hugh that you mentioned is now that we've got developers a little more trained in understanding security, they're thinking about it and trying to build it in, but it's still the product owners that don't quite understand it. We need to get them to understand it, or at least have the devs taking that into account in their estimates so that it's not yeah, I can build this button in, an hour, but I have to put all the security around it. So my estimate back to product is still a day instead of an hour. So it's still at least to that extent until we can get product really understanding security as well.
Yeah, but the thing is, if you have two teams in the room, right, or even firms, right, and they're like, one firm's like, hey, I can give you that button in 2 hours, and the other firm's like, hey, I'm going to do it right and give it to you in 10 hours.
Right.
The
And you pay for
business
those
people-
hours.
Yeah, the business people is gonna pick that too, regardless of security consideration.
Well, and that's what I'm saying, that's why
Yeah.
you need the business to understand security, so that when you say, I can do it in 2 hours, but you're gonna get hacked, or I can do it in a day, and it's gonna be as secure as I can make it,
Yeah. but
today,
that
they
doesn't
need to
resonate.
understand that, and, yeah.
That message doesn't always
If
resonate.
you can tell them, hey, that company's gonna do it in 2 hours, it might save you $50,000, but I'm gonna do it in 10 hours and save you $500,000 because I'm gonna save the outage. That's how you have to communicate with product, to let them know.
Think about that impact on our cyber insurance premiums. Like when I build it the right way, we're not gonna pay through the nose to have our butts covered because we get compromised for the things that we would have had this kind of tool tell us.
Right, but sometimes when there's such a far disconnect on education with like MBAs and like technology. Like when you talk about the security vector and risk and you're trying to break it down, they're like, no, the numbers doesn't make sense. It quite frankly comes down to that.
In some ways, I totally agree. In some ways, I think that's where we've been able to get a lot of value from a platform. Like we are Brinka customers, that's pretty well known. But the tool helps enable those conversations. And your own personal impact or influence and the ability to use information like this to convince those MBAs is where you go from senior software engineer to impactful leader.
Yeah.
That makes you the more powerful engineer on your team, being able to take information like this and translate it to business lead.
And I think a lot of times these individual tools don't quantify that to your bosses. But when you take the whole view, I can show you business unit by business unit, what's happening, where the criticals are, and how fast they're being remediated, right? So I think, a platform like this helps you tell a story versus just saying, well, you can go spend $10,000 that I got them to do it in 2 days. I'm gonna save you $50,000 when you get hacked. How do you quantify that? Because they come back, well, we haven't been hacked yet, so obviously we're doing a good job. So I think being able to tell the story through all of the tools that are reporting across your attack surface, and then be able to chop it up by the actual businesses, right? Because some will care more, some will care less, and you can focus on the ones, hey, if this business unit is hacked, we're done, right? That will shut us down for, a couple years ago, one of the banks or I think an ATM company got hit. And some ATMs were down for like a week or 2 weeks, right? So I think you just need to be able to quantify that, and a single tool doesn't really help do that.
I think that's a good approach, and I do agree that's one approach to doing things, but I think when it really comes down to it, right, like, is bandwidth. C-suite bandwidth, right? And when you do lay out a story, probably have 5 minutes to do it, right? And you're
Yeah, you're
going,
trying to elevator pitch a threat model and attack surface.
that does not work.
Yeah, no.
It-
When
it
that
just-
doesn't work,
yeah.
you hire your,
Yeah, but you can always send them a report ahead of time, right? I'm just saying, that's just one of the ways, but a lot of times, there are a lot of tools in the environment, in your attack surface that are reporting on things.
Yeah. It's
Trying
just
to
not,
use one tool to show them, I don't think it's not gonna hit home, right? You gotta.
it's not real for them yet.
Correct.
Right, it's not real, unless you've been exposed, unless you work on it on day to day, they're just like, oh, you're just.
Or unless they were the
unexposed.
ones fired for a breach that happened at another company, right? I mean, that happens all the time. There's always
Exactly.
gonna be a scapegoat.
I mean, the biggest gift you could have for that conversation is if you were under a CISA operational directive and the Fed will literally say, we're gonna charge you $100,000 a day until you resolve this.
Or SLAs, like if we,
Yeah.
with us, we have partner
Or you're gonna lose
SLAs.
PCI DSS or something.